Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bios and Bookmarks, an online reading series featuring Caribbean authors powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. And I'm your host, Anna Lucy Smith, and I'm joined today by one of my favorites, Trinidadian author Jeanelle Frontin. She is the author of the YaraStar trilogy. Hey, Jeanelle, thank you for joining us. So Jeanelle and I go a little ways back because we met when she won the CODE Burt Award for Caribbean Young Adult Literature with the first book in the YaraStar trilogy, The Unmarked Girl, which we're going to talk the most about today since it's the start of the trilogy. And we have a no spoilers policy. So we're going to keep it to the first book because a lot happens after that. Yeah. And I talk about this book as pretty typical genre fantasy young adult fiction, you know, and I think it is our Caribbean equivalent to the Yara is our Caribbean equivalent to the Katniss or the Beatrice from Divergent type character, you know, and the first book is very centered on YaraStar and building her as our female lead. Yeah. So as we go into it, I want to introduce Jeanelle first to talk a little bit more about YaraStar trilogy as a whole. And I would mention, of course, that The Unmarked Girl is the first book. It's followed closely by The Eld Queen, and then The Melded Truth is the last book. And you've published all three through your own company, Mark Made Group.
Yes.
Yes. So it's taking on you're not just an author, you are also your publisher, which is a whole different thing that we can discuss today. I know you have a lot to say on that too, and a lot of experience to share. So tell us a little bit about The Unmarked Girl and then read from it for us as well, so we can all feel it out a little bit.
Okay, so Yara is interesting protagonist. I would say that she came to me in 2016 when I had just come out of a interaction with someone that made me really question my traditional views of light versus darkness and of good versus evil. And it was one of those moments in your life that you suddenly have an awakening, or this lesson that you just learn in an instant, that life is not as simple as it may seem, and that things that are in the dark may not always be dark, and things that are in the light may not always be light. And suddenly she appeared, and I felt like she was a representation of, in a sense, a 16-year-old me who was struggling to find my own understanding of who I was, the principles that I would stand on, the person I wanted to be, you know, all of it. And that her journey and her search for meaning and belonging and sense of self was very reminiscent of me in my teenage years. So that she's a 16-year-old girl. She's found on this fantastical planet called Mira, and she's found as just a little baby girl, and she has no sense of origin. No one knows where she came from, and to make it worse, she doesn't look like any one of the two tribes that are on this planet, which are Scotads and Photaks. She is found by a Photak mother and taken in, and her journey begins. We begin with her journey as a outcast, an outsider who is unmarked, as markings are their DNA that show on their skin like tattoos, and the sense of fear and rejection that she feels, not knowing where she belongs. So I'm going to start you all with chapter 1, but first, as I always do, I must mention Izzy, Israel Silva, for this absolutely fantastic book cover that he did. He did all three of my book covers. He's just incredible. He's incredible. He was able to take everything that I said, and I'm really a very detailed and probably annoying client, and turn it into such a beauty that I saw in my mind. And I always have to pause and mention him because, he's incredible. Okay, sorry. So I'm going to start at chapter 1 and give you all a little vibe of Yara. She was in a dark place again. They all ran up to her, pointing, taunting, loathing. What is she? Where did they find her? Why did they bring her here? She's not even one of us. Why does she look like that? Where are her markings? What are you? Are you a scotad? Is she a weapon? Where did you come from? What are you? Who are you? YaraStar, do you know who you are? Yara's body jolted as her eyes flew open. Shivers ran through her at the sound of the strange, soft voice. She felt cold, even though she was swaddled in the furs from the feathered trees. Her brows furrowed around her eyes' iridescent irises as she lay in her room in the dwelling. Yara had grown quite used to the disparaging noise of her tribe's voices in her sleep. This voice had been a recent addition. Still, it wasn't the perplexity of its sudden presence that shook her. It was the eerie, ethereal language in which it spoke, a language she certainly did not know. Yet, somehow, from a place deep below the chaos of the dream, she understood its meaning. YaraStar, do you know who you are? No, I don't, she thought bitterly. Yara rubbed her eyes and glanced around her wooden room. It had been carved out from a giant sap tree by her own tribe father. Its walls and ceiling were covered in markings. It was said that they told of ancient stories and of times to come. These markings were found naturally on the trunk of every sap tree and on all living things on Mira. They were sacred. They were the markings made by Sunstar and all that was special. But I, the unmarked, am not, she muttered, quickly lowering her voice as she heard her parents tinkering around their dwelling. She would never want them to be concerned or think she was ungrateful. She knew she was, at least, very special to them. It humbled her every day. Her thoughts drifted back to the day she had asked her parents why she seemed to be the only unmarked living thing on Mira. It often bothered her, even more than her odd blue hair and weirdly colored eyes. Lana and Soren never knew what to say in those moments. No one knew where Yara had come from, for without markings, there was no traceable birth line. Still, Lana would try to remind her that even though she found her as an unmarked baby, she knew Yara was a gift from Sunstar. Yara felt the opposite. Markings were a sign of origin in Photax and even in Scotads. They traced back their generations and heritage and also their skills. Each person was born with them prominently displayed all over their bodies. Everyone knew their birthline. As a result, everyone knew their natural talents, although there were no restrictions on what you could become. The warriors, the food gatherers, the elders, and the chief, the teachers, the makers, and even the musicians were all marked. The tribe had never been accepting of what they saw as an unmarked abomination. When the elders' vote had allowed Yara to remain, the village became tense with fear and displeasure. Many stood against it, but the vote's resolution could not be changed. Almost 16 years had passed since Lana had found Yara, and while much of the village's coldness remained, so much more had changed. Yara was training to be a warrior for her tribe, and she was incredibly skilled at it. All the other trainees in her year begrudgingly admired her strength, speed, and bravery. Yara knew she needed to work hard to prove herself, so she always ensured she was ahead of all the other trainees. It hadn't taken her long to leave them all behind, all, in fact, except for Christos. The smile that crept over Yara's face at the thought of Chief Lamad's only son was not a reaction of which she was often very conscious. As she stretched her long, lean body into the softness of her swaddling, she felt the familiar tinge of excitement. She shook off the after effects of the eerie voice in her dream and willed herself to focus. She may not know who she was or where she had come from, but Yara knew what she was going to become, who she needed to become: a Photak warrior. She rushed to get ready to meet Christos, strapping on her trainee garb as quickly as her fingers would allow. She went out into the living area of her dwelling. It was a warm, wooden room that kept many of her best memories in its carved walls. She chatted about her final training days to Soren while he ate, and while Lana placed food in her mouth between sentences. In less than a week, at the age of 16, both Christos and Yara were to be inducted as true Photak warriors. Yara was the only other person in the tribe who could match his combat level. As a result, they were paired since they initiated, each at the age of 8. Yara was a solid practice partner for Christos, and they trained together almost every day. Kissing both of her tribe parents goodbye, she walked out into the dewy, delicate warmth of the new day. It was always bright, as there had been no night for thousands of years. The habitable side of Mira had faced Sunstar since its core was damaged. While the planet no longer rotated, Sunstar still did. It allowed for the subtle hints of time and the marking of days. Mornings had always been Yara's favorite time of day. Mornings were also the time that Yara and Christos trained. As Yara strode along the winding path, she breathed in the fresh air deeply. Her subconscious smile appeared again, along with its usual rush of energy. She would never openly admit it, but seeing Christos did that to her. Yara had a hard time dealing with her most naked feelings. She dressed them up in layers of stoic seriousness to a fault. While she felt certain, at times, that some of the chemistry she felt for Christos was returned, he had always just been respectful and caring. Still, she enjoyed being the only one he was close to in the village, much to the jealous confusion of the other Photak girls. Shortly after being inducted as a warrior, he would have to choose a mate. And Yara couldn't help but wonder if a part of her was more excited about the possibility. No, she thought with surety. Nothing compares to finally becoming a warrior. That's my reading of the beginning of the YaraStar trilogy.
Thank you so much, Jeanelle. Yeah, it's a good taste of what the world is. We got a good sense of the world building there. I mean, in the early part of the novel, you go into the two tribes, and we also see Yara's struggles as she's trying to find herself within this world that she doesn't quite belong. And that Yara's journey is what we experience through the whole of this first book. And one of the things that I've asked you before and that I want to explore a little bit again is, were you conscious of writing a feminist role model for young girls, a self-esteem, so somebody who they can look at as a girl who goes from talking to herself and seeing herself in the eyes of others in her tribe who call her a freak and talk about her looks in disparaging ways and are suspicious and critical of her. And she internalizes all of this. As so many teenage girls do, we form our identity in a lot of ways from how other people are describing us in those vulnerable years. And we watch her progression throughout this novel, and it's really powerful. And even from the beginning of the story, which we get a taste of there, she rejects the idea of being of her strength coming from being the choice of a mate, of a powerful mate or a powerful boy, which is something that carries on throughout the book. So even though there is this love betrayal drama, the potential even of a love triangle later down, the story is firmly grounded in Yara as a young girl finding her own identity outside of those relationships. And I'd love for you to explore that. Like, was it very intentional for you in writing her as a role model, or was it just from your own experiences? You talked about her looking at Yara as you as a 16-year-old.
I think that what was intentional about it was the understanding that our purpose comes above all else. Whatever your calling might be, whatever you feel that you need to exhibit in this life as your sense of self as your reason for even being born. If in any way that becomes compromised or conflicted in terms of the interest with another person, another job, another anything, I think that that's when we are, in a sense, out of alignment. And
Right.
I think if it's one thing that I've seen a lot of women do over time, is that they can perhaps fall in love, or maybe even get a particular type of job or whatever it might be, and you see them diminishing themselves and diminishing parts of who they are so that they can fit into what might be comfortable for other people. And I don't agree with that, nor did Yara, as you rightfully said within the book. She, as much as she didn't know who she was, she also wasn't willing to divert from that quest for the sake of anyone or anything, because she kind of figured out pretty early on, even from a subconscious level, that if she didn't get a handle of that, nothing else in her life would be successful. Relationships wouldn't work. Her path to becoming a Fotak warrior wouldn't work. Nothing would work unless she found that person who she was meant to be. So that, I guess, in that sense, there is a resonance with what it is to be a feminist protagonist in a fantastical world, where, yes, I mean, it's undeniable that having a mate like Christos would be fantastic. She definitely has big, huge feels where he's concerned. But when it comes down to the thing she desires the most, as we enter this story, it's to be a warrior. It's to fight for something she believes in, and that eclipses everything else. And I think that that's a good path to take if you might be a woman, a girl struggling with what is the line I draw between love, which is very meaningful and very powerful, versus purpose. That love ignites purpose, and it encourages it, and it gives fuel to that fire, and it encourages you to just be all that you are and more. And if it's not doing that, then you might have a hard choice to make at some point in your journey.
Oh yeah, and we watch Yara struggle with those beginnings of relationships and changed feelings, and also how certain people who you've held in high esteem through their actions can change. She questions a lot of morality, I would say, is a theme that plays strongly throughout the book. This idea, as you said early on, dark versus light, and good versus evil, and the gray areas in between, because sometimes it's not so clear cut. Yara begins the novel with a very clear cut idea of who is the right and who is correct in this saga of her planet in warring tribes, and a lot of that changes, throughout the course of the novel. And we go on that journey with Yara. Did you draw on any mythology or science fiction within your world building? That theme of morality is, of course, something that is quite typical in science fiction sagas. And what influenced that theme throughout your writing?
I think even if on a subconscious level, I mean, my favorite genre is clearly sci-fi fantasy. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. That's the reason why I'm writing this. I don't think I could write something I didn't love writing. So yes, if it's one thing that I found, particularly in sci-fi, sometimes in fantasy, yes, as well, but in sci-fi, especially with technological advancements and the worlds that go into the different principles that, let's say, an alien race may have, that humanity may not, and they come into conflict. There's always this tension between perspectives on what is good and the perspectives of what is evil, and people trying to find the ability to understand with and relate to each other and cope with each other when they have different value systems. And a lot of this trilogy explores what it means to have a changing value system and what it means to have dual value systems, where you might have grown up with one and you get introduced to another, or within you, you have two different sides of yourself that you can feel, where on one hand, you really want to be a good person, and on the other hand, there are these circumstances that show that under certain conditions, you might not be such a great person. And what does that mean? I think that it explores quite a bit of that, because that's the real world that we live in. So you're right, she does start the world in very much the way that I did as well. As I said, this was a lot of therapy for me in writing this story. This sort of naive, innocent, childlike way of looking at the world, that, you know, everyone thinks the way I do and everyone sees things a certain way, and, you know, things that are bad are bad and things that are good, and there's no gray areas at all. That is very much where she begins, and she aligns herself with, okay, so if this is bad and this is good and I want to get on the good side, these are the things I have to do, and therefore it's very clear cut. And then shortly after the story begins, she's slammed with the harsh reality that life is not that clear cut at all.
Yeah.
And it just gets worse.
We're talking a lot about Yara as a character who is a feminist character, and she's it's a coming of age story of a young girl within this bigger socioeconomic or rebellion plot, you know, in the fantasy story. But I can attest to the fact that this book, I have seen this book inspire teenage boys as well in readings. Yes. I mean, I've been with you on a lot of secondary school tours now, and I've watched you read this book to rooms of 50s, 60s students, and it holds their attention. Yes. And one of the things that I think you've done so well that can cross that kind of gender or sex boundary and bring in the teenage boys, despite the fact, like your son says, that it's such a girly cover. You know? And we have YaraStar throughout, but you know, I've seen young men respond to it. And you draw a lot on your other background in multimedia, and you have music that you can download to go along with reading this book. You've also made a big deal out of emphasizing the visuals and graphics of the book. You know, you have done life-size cutouts of Yara, and you have even gone so far as to do illustrations of some of the aspects of the setting and world building, like the glass drum that you illustrate. You know, you're bringing elements of the world alive to students, to boys and girls, and to teenagers. Talk a little bit about that process. Why did you feel the need to bring all of that into this? I would say I feel strongly that this book is not just a fantasy book on the page. It's actually a full kind of multimedia experience for a child or a teenager that wants to experience it in that way, who uses their other senses more than they use their reading skills, or and it's engaged non-readers in a way that I find so important when we go out into schools and do this kind of work. Yeah.
I think that's, there's an acknowledgement that people connect in different ways to storytelling. It's the same thing, you know, there's always this meme, well, more like a picture that's very profound that passes around that shows this aptitude test, and there's a fish and there's a cat and a bear and whoever else, and they're saying, you know, let's test who can climb this tree.
Oh yeah,
you know, right? So, right. So everybody's seen it, and I feel as though we tell a story, but there's so many elements that we need to engage in storytelling, so that even with world building, as you rightfully said, I started off wanting to understand this world from so many different aspects. I wanted to understand things like, okay, so something that isn't necessarily obvious in reading the book, but I made a decision to not have metal on the planet in book one, so that there were no forms of metal anywhere. Everything had to be built with wood, or as you said, glass. Is this glass sharded stone, red stone, that is very powerful on the planet. And I actually took a look at what are the materials that are on the planet. Are there any animals in book one? There are none. There are reasons for that.
Wow, I didn't connect that at all, actually.
Yep, there's no mention of any animals whatsoever in book one.
Wow,
because because of all that happens in book two. So that's there are so many different things that you can think of. But when I think of world building, I think of everything from what does this world sound like? What are the materials available on the planet? What does nature itself look like? What do trees look like? Like the fir trees are something that we would think of here, but these are feathered firs. So they are as soft as feathers in their branches. So they're very mystical looking. I haven't done digital art of that yet, but I'm sure it will come. Other things would be the technology on the planet, because book one is in a tribal era where there are just two villages. There isn't a lot of tech at all. It's kept very, traditional and standard in a particular timeline. But then as the trilogy progresses, you see with the eruption of different aspects of this world that were waiting there to be discovered, depending on the timeline that you were in. So that I wanted to, and I'm not gonna lie, I did know the trajectory of the story from the first book. From the very beginning, I knew what each book would be about. So I was able to then build the world based on what I knew would happen in book 2 and book 3, and only reveal certain elements because of that. But with the music had to come from a place of, as you rightfully said, I built this drum. I designed this drum. That's not a real drum. It's a fantastical drum. But Kevin and I, my guy, we sat down and had this extensive conversation because we both do music. He's an incredible producer. And said, okay, what does this planet sound like? If they were to make music, what would it be? And again, there's so many instruments, so many different songs and plugins that are metallic. And we had to eliminate anything that was metallic sounding from the music or any option of that in it, because there's no metal on the planet. So it's not going to sound like that. And the only thing I could do was to create, okay, this is what an instrument on the planet looks like. How do we make it sound like that? And then find songs and tones. It was so extensive. So to pick songs was a part of the process, and then to create the music of it so that it is really an actual representation of what Mirror itself, the planet, sounds like in book 1. So we have more music to release that has book 2 songs and book 3 songs, but for now it's just book 1. And what does book 1 sound like? Complete auditory experience. Yeah.
I mean, you've taken on a lot more than the traditional author does, right? You're a publisher of this as well. As you say, you drew on your music background to bring in that multimedia aspect to the books. And one of the things I really commend you on is you've done an amazing job of kind of cataloging and chronicling that journey from zero to award-winning author, like through your own social media. You had the great experience of being named through Kirkus Reviews as one of the top 5 indie books for middle grade and young adult readers of the year 2019, which is a huge reference in your pocket, coming out of nowhere with this book, that you've put all into, like you had your hand in every part of it, which is so satisfying, I would think, for a self-published writer who's managing your own imprint. And what I would encourage all of our listeners now to go to your social media, because one of the things I really like is your you did a video series recently about the things I learned the hard way, so that you don't have to. And it's the kind of information that emerging writers are so desperate for in our climate, because there are so many options for writers now. And sometimes we feel a little disconnected or a little overwhelmed by the amount of information online. And you've done a great job of showing everybody, this is how I did it. This is what worked for me. And it's very clear that you didn't just, put this story down on paper and then click publish. There's so much that went into it, and you're a testament to that hard work that's involved when you are self-publishing. I mean, is there anything that you would do differently? I mean, is self-publishing a path that you still feel is the right choice for you for your next trilogy, or would you want to try something different?
Honestly, anything that I would try different would be a co-publishing arrangement. I would never not publish through my company. And why? But I would also put in the caveat that I'm involved in the business of the creative industries, and I have been for some time, so that this wasn't as much as the writer part of me in writing fiction. I was a total newbie to that part of it. So that was tough. The business part of it and the publishing part weren't something that were difficult because I've worked extensively in the creative industries and on the business side of it particularly. So that if it's something that you want to do in terms of self-publishing or publishing through your own company or being a publishing entrepreneur, I advise that you really get to understand the business and decide if this is something that you want to get into, because as Anna rightfully said, to do it is to do it well and to give it your all and make sure, because you're competing with books that are published by, reputable major publishers or even smaller imprints who have this down, the business part of it down, the experience down, the look and the feel and the distribution networks down. And you want to make sure that you could at least keep the standard that they have set for, the literary world. But that being said, my intention has always been to carry these books from book form straight through to movie form or animation, dependingly.
They're perfect for that, aren't they? And you've already done the groundwork for it in a lot of the visuals that you've built.
Correct.
I was just going to say, how can we shop this to Netflix? Like, who can we find?
Correct.
Because it's perfect for the screen,
And a lot of it, oddly enough, came from, in terms of my decision as to whether I should submit to a publisher and try to find one versus doing this on my own, came a lot from watching the J.K. Rowling's experience on the business end for the Harry Potter series, where from the little I've read, like when, and again, this is nothing against publishers, but it's just an understanding for writers. When you write a book, this is your copyright, this is your intellectual property. And when you get it published, you are essentially selling or licensing your rights to an external company that is not you. And it's for them to be able to do all that they do really well, everything from really getting it into book form, creating or giving you like maybe 3 options for book covers that you can choose from, if they be so kind, to distributing it to bookstores or to Amazon or to wherever it might be. And hopefully putting, not many of them in this time will put a large marketing budget behind books. You have to be at least an author that's already selling for them to add more. If you're a newbie, then they're already taking a chance on you by even giving you an advance. And advances, for the record, an advance on the royalties that the books will receive and royalties being, for every book that's sold, the publisher is going to take a percentage of that based on the fact that they're doing all of this work for you on the business end. And then they're going to pay you a percentage of the royalties beyond them making back the amounts that they would have given you in the advance from sales. So if they don't recover that amount, you're not going to see anything. So it's sort of that relationship where you also have to market, especially in these times, you would be responsible for marketing yourself and pushing as well to help with these sales. For me, I really wanted to explore what it is to own my own movie rights, which as my publisher, I do, so that, yes, if I were to make a movie proposal to an entity like Netflix or whoever it may be, I would be, as my publisher, as in through Mark Made Group, my company, doing the negotiation one-on-one. Versus if it is with an external publisher, as an author, 1, I don't have say, and 2, that may not be money that I would make because I have licensed and or sold my rights over to a publisher who then goes out and can do what they need to do necessarily with the rights and make that money, but that's not necessarily money that you would see. What you would see as an author traditionally will be the money from sales of the books that will increase as a result of your book being popularized by a movie being out there, basically. So that's what like the J.K. Rowling experience would have been, that when this Harry Potter series would have come out and all these tons of money that the movies made, that's not actually
Warner Brothers made.
Yes, that Warner Brothers made. That's not money that she would have seen, but because the movies were so incredibly well and popular, they fed back into these sales and allowed her to make billions practically, I believe. Like she got over, like this franchise has done really well. And as a author signed to a publisher, she did really well on that. But she didn't then since change publishers for everything thereafter, the Harry Potter series, basically, from what I understand, so that she can get a better deal and probably a better cut and say, and as she's now an author of influence, which is completely understandable. So it's a question of what do you want to weigh? Do you want to do the business yourself? Let's begin there. Can you? Do you have the resources to do it, the knowledge to do it? Are you willing to learn and spend those countless hours doing that? And if you are, then becomes a question of what do you want to do with your book? How far do you want it to reach? Is it worth the work of doing all this yourself? Because it is hard work. I'm not going to glorify it. I believe it's absolutely worth it. I'm doing it every time that I possibly can. Unless, future me sees a potential opportunity for something different.
Right.
But it has to be worth it for you to go all the way and give it your very best. And I am talking everything from, I had to learn, obviously, our ISBN agency, which is the little barcode at the back of the book here. I'm not sure if you can see that. That's with the NALIS, right? So that as a publisher and with my company, I had to sign up to be a publisher with NALIS and purchase a block of ISBNs to be able to publish my books. So you use two different ISBNs for paperback books versus digital books, so that each book, hardcover would also be a different one, I believe, so that each book can have up to maybe 3 ISBNs dependingly. So they have to cater for those things. And then it goes on into even putting together the book itself, like the inside parts of it would have been like Adobe InDesign. I had to learn an entire software for how to do that.
Did you lay out the book yourself
as
well?
Yes, everything, every part of the process I did. So I learned how to use Adobe InDesign, because if I want to be a publisher, even if one day I hire somebody to do these things, I need to be able to direct them in terms of the style I like, or to be able to edit the file. And I take it upon myself to learn everything, even if I have to hire someone, so that I can not be an annoying client and trying to tell them how to do things. And they're like, what do you mean? And now I could actually speak the language. But for all 3 books of the trilogy, I did every single step myself. And then of course, getting it onto Amazon, there's a paperback format with Adobe InDesign. There's a Kindle format that Amazon takes, which is different. And it's an entire thing, but Amazon makes it so great with their Kindle direct publishing program to allow you to print your books on demand and have it available. So you don't have to put out any money to have your book stocked on Amazon whatsoever. They only print it when somebody clicks purchase, so that it's not a cost to you. It's only a benefit to you once you've done your part correctly. So
and I think, and that's what I really commend you for. You've made the effort to put this out there through your own social media, to help people learn from it. And I have to say, you don't make it sound easy. So I mean,
it's not
you
easy.
need to have the background. You need to have the background. And the thing is, you have the skill set to market and produce your books at a high quality. And
but I also have the support.
Yes,
so that
exactly.
Even Bocas Lit Fest as an entity, Anna, you in particular, you've been so supportive in this process. I have to shout out Paper-Based Bookshop and RIK, both of which were willing to carry the books. My books are restocked at Paper-Based Bookshop right now, RIK as well. We have to probably do an order there, but it's really, I've had a wonderful people. RIK in Gulf City Mall, big shout out to y'all. That's where I did my first book signing.
Oh, that's my favorite RIK.
Mine too. I'm sorry, all the other RIKs, but they have a special place in my heart. They are so accommodating and just
I don't know if Christiana still works there, but shout out to Christiana
at
RIK.
That was her. Yes,
she's amazing.
Yes. She's absolutely amazing. And it was one of those experiences. That experience is actually on my YouTube channel as well. If anybody wants to see what a book signing
love that video as well.
Like. Yeah,
I love your anticipation. You're sitting down by yourself in the mall, going, "Here I am."
Was anybody going to come and want my book at all? Like, it was so scary. It turned out so well in the end. But
it did.
It's like exposure, so much exposure. And I'll be honest, even learning to read these books, you might think that because you read you would want to read it. I was mortified. When you told me I had to read at the CODE Burt Award, I was just like, this is not cool. I hired Tamara Williams from Red 96.7 to do like a reading coaching session with me because she's so incredible.
And you were
and I was
fantastic.
just like, but it was mortifying because now I have to put on the persona of my characters, and suddenly I felt very self-conscious about being a young adult author. It was a lot, but it's a learning process and it's worth it. And people like Anna make it so much better. Thank you.
And thank you for this work that you're doing. And I mean, we have talked a little bit already about the books that have influenced you. You talked about, following J.K. Rowling's journey and all of that.
Yes.
And how do you feel your book fits within the canon of Caribbean literature? Because that's a big question mark. We're chronicling our 100 Caribbean books that made us. So that's a campaign that's ongoing throughout this year with the Bocas Lit Fest. And, people have been mentioning the books that they think personally influenced them. Yes. I'm very curious about what you think from our Caribbean literature has influenced you. And how do you feel about the fact that, books like yours, you're a Caribbean author, but you're not easily identified. It's not a cultural book. It wouldn't ever be identified as Caribbean literature. Yes. I mean, how does that work for you? How do you feel about it?
I have so many mixed feelings. I'm not going to lie. I do. Because for me, so there's no denying that fantasy and sci-fi are my favorite genres. It's kind of like saying, I love curry, because I do. Like, there's never going to be anything that's going to stop me from loving curry. Like, curry is it. And sometimes I feel this sense of guilt almost that I am not as culturally prolific when it comes to my writing, simply because the dreams that I have. So like, I dream fantastical, sometimes apocalyptic dreams. Like, it's all, this is since I was a child. So it's like, I can't pretend that my brain isn't making up these stories in the way that it is. But at the same time, I always wanted to make sure people knew that regardless of the genre, this is coming from here. This is from Trinidad and Tobago. So that, like, I remember I told you, even in the back of my books, I make sure to mention that I'm from here. I believe every human being on this planet should experience our native islands. Like, I kind of try my best to say, I know that this isn't what you would see as Caribbean fiction, but you need to come here because it still came from here. And it was one of my experiences as well in the music industry, which is what I was working on prior to this. And I mean, still in it, but more on a national level then with Music TT. Big up the, Melissa Jimenez, GM there. And one of the things that we worked out at the start back in 2015, 2016 would have been what is local music, what is local content as a definition when it comes to music. And the reason that it was under such great discussion is simple things like, if there were ever to be one day voluntary or involuntary local content quotas that we have with our broadcasting agents, whether it's radio or TV or whoever, how would we define what's local? And for me, when it was a discussion of music, there was a lot of question of, is local music genres that are birthed here? Or, is it soca and calypso and like all of it that is here? Or is local music something that is created from the heart and mind of a Trinbagonian? And that was the understanding that we had to reach to then add on the bits and pieces that were more complex, like, okay, but what if there are two writers and one is from away and one is from here? Like, so there were all these other complex issues that came after.
Of course, it could never be simple, Jeanelle.
Never simple. But what we did come to is the understanding of what is considered local content is that. However, there's something that Camille Severn Abrahams had said with her animation students, where I believe she had told a story of once asking them to draw characters of their own. And none of the children drew characters of their skin color. They were all these like white superheroes, basically. Yeah. And it was a very westernized view. And her mission, a lot of her mission has been around making sure that we see ourselves and embrace ourselves in terms of even animation and how we perceive it. It's a lot of the reason why Yara skin color and my skin color are basically the same. I see her as my daughter, as I mentioned in the dedication and the book, because I wanted to be sure that I am portraying something that is real in this regard. So in that knowledge, the role of cultural writers when it comes to fiction, people who include our culture, is so critical, because this is a part of the footprints that Trinidad and Tobago is making on the world. And we can't let that be eclipsed by any sort of conditioning, whether it be Hollywood or otherwise. Like it needs to be said. So that's where my mixed feeling comes in, because on one hand, I can't pretend that fantasy and sci-fi in the form that comes from me isn't what I love. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that our folklore isn't fantasy and sci-fi. And sometimes I wonder if one day I'll have a dream and, there'll be a duet in it that has something very interesting. And then great, I get my book that is, completely in line with that. So that
maybe
it's a mixed feeling. The inspiration, maybe I'll dream it tonight.
Well, maybe now you will, that you planted the seed. You're like, hey,
germinating.
You're getting a lot of appreciation on social media, Jeanelle. Russ says he's appreciating the speculative elements described. Lisa Latouche says this world is very interesting.
Thank you.
Israel says that you're his best client.
Oh, appreciate it. I'm glad I'm not as annoying as I think.
Well, he has to say that. He's in.
Yeah, well, true.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And Rust has a question for you. He asks, what are key things to keep in mind when writing for a YA audience?
Okay. So this was definitely an exploration for me. So that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Because I initially didn't know that I was going to write YA. I had the idea of the story, but I didn't know Yara's age until a little bit and shortly after. And her being 16 is what determined the YA audience, because generally the age of your protagonist, especially in YA, determines where the story falls in the categories of the genres themselves. So that when it comes to a YA writing, I think the part that was a little difficult for me was trying to get back into my head at 16 to see what kind of stories and the levels at which they were written would have, and what types of issues that I was facing as well back then, or what deliberations were most relevant and most significant in my life. Simple things like the way that I would process relationships and love is far different now than 16-year-old me. You can't age your character by necessarily speaking about things from where you're at as an adult, because then it would be clear, unless your character, of course, is somebody who is young but wise in their years, and that is a possibility as well. But for the most part, when it's YA, you really need to figure out and kind of embrace for your world and your time, how does my character speak? And that was difficult because there are a lot of things I wanted to say in a more complex way, in the way that I would probably write in nonfiction or in other fiction that I would write. But I knew that I would lose a young audience if I carried it too high in different ways. At the same time, it could be also good to challenge them. But I think that was my biggest consideration when it comes to it, was how to write the prose so that it is actually a 16-year-old and listening to 16-year-olds talk nowadays, like that's
the key to it, isn't it? You need to listen to authentic dialogue.
To them. Yeah.
Because we can quickly fall out of touch with that teenage self that
easily.
we had. The issues may stay in our mind, but the way they're expressed now is every 5 years, every decade it changes. And I have watched how quickly an important novel about important issues can be discarded or laughed at in a classroom setting when I take the author to read, because it just is stilted. It's not authentic. It doesn't speak in the voice of the readership. And to me, that's definitely one of the most crucial things. And that's something your novel does well, the whole trilogy does well, that it is speaking at the level of the reader. It's simple, it's accessible, and it's authentic. And the way that Yara approaches her relationships is authentic. I think that's really good advice, Jeanelle, for sure. I would like to invite you to read. We've only got about 10 minutes left, and I would love you to give us another little piece from YaraStar.
Sure. I can read a few minutes lower down in your book. No spoilers, I promise, but
good.
It will give
No
you
spoilers.
a different environment. Okay. Yara kicked at a red glass sharded stone and dropped down next to a feathered tree. She sighed and held her head. She felt like she was going quite mad. The voice probably wasn't even real, and either way, there was nothing she could do about it now. Focus, Yara, she thought to herself. You need to focus on surviving. So, what do you need to survive? She looked up at the furs of the feathered tree. She could make a mini swaddling with them. She just needed to find food and a safe place to rest. The very thought of sleep made her body ache. It had been a long day. She pushed herself up and went searching the area. She found a low-lying canopy of branches a little way off. After a quick perimeter sweep, she felt confident that it was adequately safe. She built a makeshift swaddling. Then she hydrated herself by a nearby sap tree and found a tiny mushroom patch for sustenance. She returned to the swaddling and lay down for the day. She would have never known that the last time she had slept in her own swaddling would have been her very last. Yara's life had changed drastically and mercilessly. She was drained beyond words. Yara closed her eyes. Within minutes, the exhaustion took its hold and she drifted off to sleep. What are you? She's a skotad. We always knew it. She's such a freak. Cursed abomination. She's a weapon. She isn't even a real person. She has no markings. She was made by skotads. She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong anywhere. YaraStar, 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 arise. Yara shot up from her swaddling, the furs falling from her as she hit her head into the canopy. She held her forehead and groaned, feeling disoriented. What did I even hit, she thought, trying to figure out what it was in her room back at her dwelling. Then it all came back in a rush. She remembered where she was and she felt a shot of panic. Instinctively, she peered out from her hiding place and surveyed the surroundings. Everything looked the same, peaceful and beautiful. She calmed herself. She had taken a lot of care in choosing this place of rest. She lay back down, sighing with her hand still on her forehead, damning the voice for its continued torment. In the distance, a steady hand that pulled back a taut bowstring with an arrow paused its release. I'm not going to give you any more because the rest would spoil it.
Yeah, we're going right into a good action scene right there. So Jeanelle, Liz Ross says, glad you're staying true to yourself and your passion is very inspiring.
I appreciate it.
And we have another question from Lisa Latouche. In your writing process, do you use visual boards as you go along, or is the world all in your head?
I am a definite vomit it all out on something person. Like I am very much that. When I first started this, Izzy, actually, Israel Silva, my guy, actually put a 2D image, like when we first were trying to get the view of Yara, he did a 2D image for me to kind of see if this was the direction that we would be going in and so on, a 2D character. And I remember printing that out because first I had like a what I thought Yara would look like random graphic online. I printed that out at first and then I printed his own out and I made like a paper book cover thing. And I put her in the front with the name of the book and I had it stuck up on my computer while I was typing so that every single time that I was writing the story, I would look at her and try to go into that world. I also saved lots of photos of anything that would remind me of what that world looked like online. So lots of fantastical photos. Pinterest is so good for anything like this, by the way. Pinterest boards work really well. But just a Google search of just fantasy images, if you're writing fantasy or whatever your genre might be, really helps with that. And then when it comes to the organization aspect, I always keep a working doc open with everything from the synopsis of things to my characters themselves, I do extensive character profiles so that everything from the eye shape, mouth shape, like you name it, eye color, hair, every part of it, any accessories, the whole works, straight through to their personality traits. Things about them that are insecurities, things that are strengths and weaknesses, various little things like that. I do full character profiles so that I really get to know them, their birth times and dates, and how they're born and who are their parents. And for main characters as well as side characters that are significant, because I want to really have them known like I would know somebody that I love. And so that's also in my working document, along with the world itself, world building. Now, one thing I do, and it's something that I do, I think I would recommend it, because I make up a lot of words in my book that are native to the story itself. But in making up words in my book and names for my characters and names of tribes and so on, I make sure to ensure that anything that comes to mind, I do a few checks. So the first thing I check is to see whether there is a meaning of this word, even if I think it's made up. So I just do a Google search of the meaning to see if anything comes up or anything similar to it, because I don't want to put a word that means something contrary to what I'm trying to imply. Names as well, I look up name meanings. I make sure that the name meaning, if it is a name meaning in existence that's similar to it, is aligned with my character and who they are. And I also use Google Translate to see whether in any other language in the world, that word could mean something offensive. Because it's something that I saw as a tip where people were saying, like, when they submit their books to publishers, they have to not be too attached to the names of their characters, because the names could change. And the reason why is because some names may literally be offensive. Or names might be names of a serial killer from 10 years ago or something like that. You never know.
God forbid.
So, yeah.
Yara, the serial killer.
Thank you. So if you're going all the way, I do that in my working document as well, and try to note every possible part of this little system that I'm building and world that I'm building, and to make sure that once I am in the creative space of writing, I don't ever have to worry about what this means, or is that person's eye color blue or gray? All of it is there if I need a quick reference. And yeah, it really helps. So both of them, visuals and then a very hardcore working doc.
Amazing, brilliant advice. I mean, I hope everybody listening takes that. I mean, just for general life, I probably need to organize myself like that. Who's this person you met yesterday? What was their eye color? I need it.
I don't do that, but okay.
No, it's good advice. It really is. And Janelle, we like to end this segment with our 3 envelopes. So you're going to pick a question. We have question 1, 2, and 3 in these envelopes. Throw a number out at me, and I'm going to ask you our last question of the day.
Okay, 3.
All right.
Last question. So last question of the day.
Last question of the day with the last number. Good job.
Yeah.
Okay, so blue pill or red pill? The red pill will let you visit and explore Mira, the landscape you created for YaraStar. Or the blue one will let you journey into the future 10 years from now. Which one would you take? A nice fantastical kind of question for you. Right up your alley.
It is up my alley. So if you had asked me this maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said 10 years into the future, because there is something I love about the thought of time travel and future exploration and, seeing that part of it. But I've come to this place in my life of understanding that when you really trust in the moment of what is happening now and give your best and your all here, the future will take care of itself, whatever form of divinity you believe in or not. That the more that I divide my thoughts into what may happen tomorrow, is the less concentration I have on what I can give today. So that I've removed myself from that. And on top of that, the very thought of going into a world that I have created is the very reason I want this to become a movie. I want to be able to see that world on screen. So if you're saying I could actually go into that world, hands down, yeah.
Okay.
Send me to Mira.
I thought that was an easy answer. I was expecting you to be like, Mira, I'm going to be there tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I hope we do see it unfold one day on the screen. And I know that you have the talent and the drive to make it happen. Like, I trust that. And I can see it happening. So maybe if you had taken that 10 years in the future, that's what you'd see. You'd have that option there too. But thank you so much, Jeanelle, for joining us. Thank you to everybody watching and listening. Check out Jeanelle's social media pages. As I said, she's got so much information there about her own journey and the book. It's really helpful to any of our local authors. And definitely get your copy of the YaraStar trilogy at one of our local booksellers. It is available on Amazon for those of you who don't have the choice, but Paper-Based Bookshop in the Normandy Hotel and RIK Book Services Limited. Great options to go out and pick up all 3 books for the teenagers in your life, or you, because I enjoy it too. Thank you so much, Jeanelle. Everybody enjoy your day. Jeanelle, bye, and thank you.
See you guys.